Thank you for joining ICMI today as we present a really interesting conversation on the effortless customer experience. You'll get a glimpse over the next few minutes on how customer service is changing because of the evolution of the contact center, the significant shifts in the customer's expectations, and the new skills required from our agents. You'll also hear how the agent is a core component of that effortless experience. My name is Stealey Reed, and I'm the Content Director for ICMI. I encourage you to be social today and tweet out some things you've learned here. I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Dixon this morning, the Executive Director of Strategic Research for CEB and the co-author of The Effortless Experience, Conquering the New Battleground for Customer Loyalty. Again, we'd love to hear how you like this educast, so please use our handles and hashtags that are up on screen to keep the conversations going. We at ICMI think that creating the effortless customer experience is so important, which is why Matt will be joining us this May in San Diego as one of our keynote speakers at the Contact Center Expo and Conference. If you haven't already, check out the entire program and Matt's not to be missed opening session on Thursday, May 8th. You can also learn more by reading The Effortless Experience, which came out last fall. So, Matt, many of us, including myself, were introduced to you when we first read the Harvard Business Review article, Stop Trying to Delight Your Customers. That was a pretty radical message to send out to contact center leaders who have bet their success on customer delight. What inspired you to write that article?
Well, it's first, Sarah, thanks to you and to ICMI for hosting me today, and really looking forward to the conference in San Diego. Always look forward to going to San Diego, especially when it's 4 degrees out here on the East Coast. But in particular, to spend time with ICMI and all the members out there and talk about some of this research. You know, the article that we wrote in 2010, Stop Trying to Delight Your Customers. This had come off the heels of a couple of years of research that we had done, and we had actually started in our group. We're a research organization. We in our customer service division had actually been out there trying to understand, at the behest of our members, our clients, who really want to know, heads of customer service from around the world, who really want to know, what kind of service experience will drive loyalty. And I think the conventional wisdom out there, as you correctly pointed to, is that in order to get more loyal customers, it's not enough to simply meet the customer's expectations in a service interaction. We've actually got to go above and beyond. We've got to wow the customer. We've got to delight them. It goes by many different terms in different companies. And this is so steeped in the fabric of every single customer service organization, every single contact center, certainly any one that I've ever visited. I mean, all you have to do is look on the wall of your average contact center and you see the wall of fame with the emails and the letters and the thank you notes from appreciative customers really praising frontline agents and frontline reps for going above and beyond, for delighting them in the service experience. And so, we try to create this culture internally. We try to train and coach people on how to deliver that moment of delight. We reward and recognize those moments, and we celebrate them. And so it's really, again, it's woven into the fabric of who we are as customer service organizations. And when we went out and studied this, we actually studied across a large number of customers. We're going to talk a lot more about this in San Diego, and there's, of course, a lot more about it in the book. About more than 125,000 customers we've now studied, and we went out and tried to understand what impact did the service experience actually have on their loyalty to different vendors, to different companies, to different brands that they do business with. And what we found was, and this was completely shocking to us, what we tried to understand was, what are the right ways to delight the customer? How best does one delight? Because there are lots of different things we could do. But what we actually found was that delight, actually in aggregate, doesn't really pay. And what we found was that really the high point of loyalty you get with a customer in a service interaction is really to deliver on the basics, to meet their expectations, and that those customers whose expectations are exceeded were actually only marginally more loyal in the long run than those customers whose expectations were actually met. And when we found this, it was a bit like we had kind of this, it was sort of the stages of grieving, I think. I think at first we didn't really believe it, because who would believe such a thing? It doesn't make any sense. And, as you start to dig into it and you really start to ask these critical questions, of course, as we really kick the tires on the model and make sure this was right, what we came to realize was that we've, in customer service, have been kind of placing a big bet on something that
it's hard to deliver. In fact, we find that customers only delight it about 14% of the time when you ask customers, and we do it's hard to actually deliver on that delight mission. And that those customers, again, who are delighted, when we go back and study them a couple of years after that moment of delight, we find that many of them are actually not our customers anymore. They're buying from our competitors, or they've gone online and badmouthed us for something we've done since. And so it's actually it's a behavior it's hard to deliver on. It's something that's very hard to deliver on. It's expensive. It means refunds, give-backs, breaking policy, all kinds of things for companies. It's really hard to operationalize it, and then it doesn't even pay us back with customer loyalty. Well, boy, then why are we doing this? And there are better objectives that we should be shooting for. But that was really the premise of the article, and as we dig into it, we actually find, and we'll talk about this, I know, over the next couple of slides, is that customers are actually looking for something quite a bit different than the delightful experience. Now, I think you're right. The article and the title itself generated a lot of buzz and a lot of, I think, uproar in the context of the community, and I think it was meant to do that, because it was really a call. I think a moment where we're trying to kind of grab the community by its lapels and shake it and say, hey, let's really figure this out, because we've been struggling to delight the customer. We've been struggling to drive loyalty through the service channel. Let's use data and really try to figure out what's the better experience to deliver in customer service to serve both our customers, our employees, and the overall objectives of the enterprise.
Well, I remember very clearly when that article came out. I was an executive at a contact center, and it certainly made us stop and think about how we were serving our customers, how we were looking at their experience, and honestly how our agents were truly impacting that experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the things that I love about the new book is that mantra, that message that really is woven through, that customer service should be more proactive, and it should be about defense and less about the offense. And then you raise this idea about, customer relief. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. So when we found this big finding that customers who are delighted are not that much more loyal than those whose expectations are simply met, we went back and actually started to dig into the data more to try to find out, well, what impact does service really have on a customer's loyalty? And what we found was, and this is where we went from, if you will, bad news to worse news, which is that on average, the average customer experience or customer service interaction makes a customer more disloyal than loyal. In fact, it makes any customer as a service interaction is 4 times more likely to be disloyal than loyal at the end of it. Then, it's, as we break that apart, we try to understand, well, why is it that we drive customers crazy in service? What we find is a host of usual suspects. It's the stuff that we've been talking about for years in customer service, but we try to give it a name and try kind of a wrapper, which I'll talk about here in a moment. But it's things like repeat contacts. It's channel switching. I go to the website. I'm confused by what I see there, maybe just by the number of choices that are presented, or perhaps by the jargon that's used on the website, and I bail out and I pick up the phone instead, or it's the transfers, or it's passing the buck, or it's repeating my story, or it's just keying in my account information and then being asked to repeat it by the agent who answers the phone. It's being treated in a generic fashion. It's the general hassle factor I feel like I have to endure when I go through a service interaction. And the name we gave to all this stuff was this notion of customer effort. It's the work that we force our customers to go through to get their problems fixed. It's how hard do we make it for them to get their issues resolved. And so that's why we called it this notion of customer effort. And we found, as we ran the data, that those customers who had low effort interactions were much more likely to keep buying from us, much more likely to spend more with us over time, much less likely to say anything bad about us, and displayed virtually none of those disloyalty behaviors that we know customer contact tends to drive. I think when you lift up a little bit and you think about customer service and the role it plays in customer loyalty, what we actually found is really, driving positive loyalty. When you think about loyalty, there is both, just like a football team, there's an offensive coordinator and there's a defensive coordinator, and there's an offensive playbook and a defensive playbook. And then on the offensive loyalty, here we're talking about building an incredible brand, a great reputation, a product that actually delights. But when we think about the defense, and frankly, this is a part of loyalty that most companies don't think about. They think of loyalty as just an upside game, but they don't think about while they're filling this bucket of goodwill, this loyalty bucket, there are holes in the bottom of that bucket that we've got to plug. And the truth is the biggest culprit there is customer service. That is the biggest driver of disloyalty. And what we often say to our member companies and our clients is, you've really got to think of the proper role. When it comes to loyalty, the proper role of customer service is not to drive positive loyalty. It's not to play offense. You're not the quarterback. It's not about driving positive loyalty by delighting the customer. Rather, your real objective is to mitigate disloyalty by making things easy for the customer when it comes to service. And when you get your head around that, I think exactly to your point before, it becomes a real tactical thing. Because think about the message to your frontline reps saying, "Go out, hey guys, let's go out and delight our customers." Well, that means many different things to different people. It's interpreted in many different ways. Some good, some bad, some profitable, some not so profitable. But when we think about this notion of making things easy, that's the kind of idea that managers and frontline representatives really get right away. They can put their finger exactly on the things that they do and that their companies do to drive their customers crazy. And it gets to a real tactical notion of what we can do to make life better for our customers and really play a positive role in this entire loyalty game for the company. So in the book we lay out, the blueprint of what we think it means to be a low-effort company. There are 4 big pillars, and we talk more about those as we go on. We're going to spend a lot of time in San Diego talking about those in the keynote presentation, what it means to be a low-effort company. But I know one of the ones we want to talk about specifically, and you teed us up in the beginning, is talk about the role of the frontline representative delivering that low-effort experience.
And, we're so excited to hear more about, those 4 pillars in particular in San Diego. But just to set the stage, for this conversation and the one that we're going to have in a couple months, if you could give me just a clear, couple sentence definition, what truly is the effortless experience?
Sure. The effortless experience, and I'd go back to those big drivers that we have. And if you asked anybody, and let's just put on our customer hat for a moment, and so many of the folks who are going to be listening to this educast surely come from contact center leadership positions or management positions, quality assurance roles, etc. And we all wear a hat, that is about, it's our company hat, right? It's our functional hat. But let's put on our customer hat for a moment, because we all do business with companies ourselves. We buy from companies. We have cable operators and mobile phone operators. We have dry cleaners. We have lawn services, so on and so forth. And let's think about, when something goes wrong, what does it mean to, in your own experience, to have a low-effort interaction with that company? What does it mean to have an easy service interaction? Well, I think in very kind of layperson terms, it would mean being able to choose the route to issue resolution. And for many companies, one of the things we'll talk a lot about, or for many customers, I should say, that preference is really shifting towards self-service over live, especially around those simple issues.
Right.
And having an intuitive, easy self-service experience. But hey, if we need to call the company, then it's the kind of interaction where we don't want to actually have to contact the company again. We don't want to have to repeat information. We'll be tolerant of transfers up to a point, as long as it means not more than one. As I get to somebody who can really solve my issue, doesn't force me to repeat information, demonstrates some knowledge about me as a customer, and tailors the interaction to my actual issue and to who I am as a person. That's kind of what it means when I think about an easy service interaction. And truthfully, that's corroborated exactly by our data. These are effortless experience is one where we are able to navigate. We're able to pick a self-service channel if we want, and that channel provides a sticky experience. It's not one that frustrates us and forces us to pick up the phone. It's one in which the company doesn't just solve the contact I called in about, but they're proactive and they help me think about issues I might encounter down the road. It's one in which the rep on the other end of the phone really tailors that experience to who I am as an individual. And it's one really where that rep is empowered, as we're going to talk about here in a moment, to deliver a low-effort experience for me personally and for my specific situation. So effortless experience is lots of things, but I think the easiest way to define it is really, and I find this, when I ask people, what does it mean to have an easy service interaction, they usually articulate it better than I could. But, when I think about it, it's the kind of interaction that looks and feels like this. And I think we all have that deep kind of sense in our gut about what that looks and feels like in our own consumer lives.
Well, I think that I already know the answer, and I'm sure our audience does as well. But, why is that effortless experience so important, not just to the customer and to the contact center, but honestly to that overall corporate brand?
Yeah, it's a great point. So a few reasons I'd point to the effortless experience being critical to not just the brand, the company, but the customer in particular, and the mission of delivering loyalty. Let me just share a couple of data points with you, and these are things we'll talk more about in San Diego. When we get down to brass tacks, and quite specifically, and we look at customers who had high effort experiences. Okay, so these are the customers who had to call back. They're the ones who had to endure. Repeat their stories over and over again, repeat information. They were transferred. They had to switch channels. They were treated in a generic fashion and generally perceived that the service experience was a big hassle. When we look at those customers and we isolate them, what we find is that 96% of them were likely to display disloyalty behaviors. 96% of those customers who had to jump through hoops, who had to endure this high effort experience, were likely to be disloyal. That means they're unlikely to keep buying from us. They're unlikely to spend anything else with us, and they are very likely to get on Twitter, Facebook, or even just email friends and family and say bad things about us. And to your brand point before, so those customers who have bad experiences, high effort experiences, 96% of them are likely to display disloyalty experiences. Now, or behaviors. On the other hand, those customers who have low effort experiences, those whose issues are resolved in a single interaction, who feel like the company is being proactive with me, they're taking ownership, they're not just solving my issue, but they're actually helping me think about issues that might happen after I hang up the phone and I try to implement the fix that they just told me I need to go out and implement, where I feel like I'm being treated in kind of a tailored and personalized fashion, not in a generic way. I'm not being treated like a number. I'm not transferred a lot. I don't have to repeat information. If I want to use self-service, hey, it's an intuitive, simple experience. Those customers who have low effort experiences, only 9% of them were likely to display disloyalty behaviors. Now, that 96 to 9 contrast is just huge, and in all the research we've done in all the years that I've been studying customer service and this question of customer loyalty, I've never seen that stark of a contrast, 96 to 9. And you asked this question about the brand. One of the things we really know, and it's a bummer to think about this, and it's kind of bad news, but it is the reality, is when customers have great experiences, when they do have those delightful service experiences, the unfortunate reality is they kind of keep them to themselves. They tend not to tell very many people. In fact, we look at those customers who have great service, if you will, delightful or wow moments in customer service. They really do keep it to themselves. They don't tell a lot of people about it. But when they have a bad or high-effort service experience, they tell everybody.
Everyone.
In fact, the probability that not only do a high percentage of them tell others, but a high percentage of those who tell others tell 10 or more people. Contrasted with the people who have great experiences, most of them tend to tell fewer than 3 people about those great experiences. So this has this ripple effect, which many other people have written about and talked about on our brand. And today, the web obviously is presenting a digital soapbox to our customers, and they get on Twitter, they get on Facebook, and they tell the world. Anybody who will listen, I want to tell about this horrible experience I had. And it's it's an unfortunate truth out there, but these high effort experiences not only, exactly to your point, not only make those single customers disloyal, but it drives up the propensity that they're going to spread that disloyalty to other current or potential customers for us.
And we are seeing exactly the same thing, that it keeps coming back to loyalty, to that customer loyalty, and to the battle that your book title so accurately alludes to. And our contact center community is screaming this. They're saying that 94% say that customer loyalty is an important priority for their company. Mm-hmm. And in fact, maintaining and improving customer engagement loyalty is a top 2014 challenge acknowledged by the community in a recent survey that we put out. And as we all know, it's the customer experience that drives that customer loyalty and is driving that voice that they have, and that voice that is, for good or bad, much louder than it ever has been before. But here's what I see as the big challenge. When I was reading through your book and just, in my experience with managing contact centers in the past, the big challenge for contact center executives everywhere, and I'm going to quote this directly from your book, for all the science and strategy that is put into creating an optimal customer experience, the everyday delivery of that experience is typically in the hands of hundreds, if not thousands of reps. It's well beyond the control of the leadership team. And oftentimes this is the thing that keeps contact center leaders up at night, that lack of control, that they can put in all of the right things, all the right processes, the right metrics, the right technology, yet we still have this discrepancy. So what do we in the contact center do about this delivery discrepancy that is certainly bound to impact that whole customer experience?
Yeah, I had a conversation with a contact center leader who shall remain nameless, but recently told me that, the thing that keeps me up at night is that if I knew I could clone myself 1,000 times, because I know how to deliver that great customer experience, I'd sleep a lot better, but I can't. I mean, the truth is I've got 1,000 different people on the floor across a range of different contact centers being managed by many, many different types of managers, differently skilled, et cetera, and it's really hard for me to maintain some semblance of control. And, what do we do in that kind of environment? We'll talk more about this in a moment. What do we do knowing that this carefully crafted strategy of delivering the optimal customer experience is in the hands of lots of people at the end of the day who you don't directly control? You can't control exactly what comes out of the mouth. What do? Well, we tighten the screws. We put in place, we invest in training. We try to put in place scripting or suggested language at the very least, which is code for scripting, really, in the, if you were to ask the average rep. And so really try to, we checklist it, and we try to make sure that people are adhering to what we know would be a great customer experience. It's really interesting because what we found is that strategy of lockdown, of really Six Sigmaing your customer experience, while it might have been suited for the old world, really starts to fall apart in the new world. Let me explain what I mean by that. If we look at the page here, and this is kind of take a step back a little bit from the question, and think about what's going on in the customer world first. This is really where the rubber hits the road. And if we're use a generic terms, yesterday versus today, and it varies by company, of course, but if we think back, for the average company, it's not too long ago when the primary mechanism that our customers used, and most of the people I think listening to this educast can certainly remember these days, when self-service wasn't that advanced, and really the main mechanism for contact and for getting an issue resolved was to pick up the phone and call the company. The truth is your reps handled the full spectrum of issues. They handled the simple issues, average issues, complex issues, and the truth is for the average rep, the issue mix that you saw, that you encountered over the day would be, easy issue, moderate issue, difficult issue, easy issue, and it was pretty predictable. And this is a world where things were predictable, and truthfully, if anything went wrong in the customer experience, the worst case scenario is that they would actually, probably write a letter or that kind of a letter of complaint to the CEO or the VP of customer service, and it kind of stopped there. So bad experiences were easy to contain. And the other thing I'd add in here is, there was a lack of information out there for customers. So if they wanted to get an issue resolved, then we were the authority. They had to call us because we knew everything about that issue and everything about their product and so on and so forth. Now, contrast that with today. There's so much has changed in customer service. This is obviously one of the big ones. Self-service is obviously siphoning off a lot of the complex issues. All these things are going the way of the Internet, of self-service tools and technologies. And now it's the stuff that couldn't be solved through self-service that ends up making its way into the phone queue that our live service reps have to handle. Not only that, but the people that they're talking to, the customers they're talking to, are vastly more educated about their own problems and their own issues. I mean, think about the last time you had the problem with your mobile phone, for example. What's the first thing you do? Rather than calling the mobile provider or the manufacturer, chances are you got on Google or you went to a search engine and you searched for that issue with your device to find out, is this a common device? And if so, what's the potential fix? And how do I best negotiate for a solution with the manufacturer? Is this a well-known and well-documented technical failure? Or think about, last time your child was sick, before you called a pediatrician, chances are you went to WebMD to check it out and do some self-diagnosis. And oftentimes, those customers are actually more educated about the issues that they're calling in about than the company's service rep on the other end of the phone. They're really armed to the teeth with data and with insight. Now, and then the last thing I'd say is that bad issues are really hard to contain. And we talked about this a few moments ago. Customers today who have bad experiences, it is well beyond the point. They probably don't even bother sending a letter that they know will never be read or responded to, but actually jump right to Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or some place where they can actually publicly badmouth the company and really kind of draw the ire of everyone else on that company. To go to any company's Facebook page, and it's just littered with negative comments from customers who are out there really taking the company to task for some wrong that they perceive that has been done to them. So the mix in issues has really changed dramatically. On average, for your frontline rep, so many of those issues that are coming in are more complex on average, and the easy stuff has really gone away. You're dealing with sophisticated customers, knowledgeable customers who are ready to pull the trigger and badmouth you and the company at a moment's notice. So it is a dramatically different frontline operating environment. And here's the thing, when we talk about customer effort, we did some research, and we'll, talk a lot about this in the book, and I will in San Diego as well, that when you break it apart and you think about what is it that actually drives customer effort, it turns out a big chunk of this really is in the hands of the frontline rep. It's the quote you mentioned before. We found specifically that 2/3 of the effort equation is actually a function of how the customer feels about the interaction, and 1/3 of it is about what they have to do. So 1/3 of it is the actual steps they need to go through. Did they channel switch? Were they transferred? Did they have to call back? Did they have to repeat information? Things like that. But 2/3 of it is actually just their perception of how much hassle was involved in the interaction. And when you're talking about perception and perception management and how the customer feels, that comes down to what happens between the rep and your customer in the moment, in the service channel. And the reality is when we look at this, this old world, new world contrast, it's a very different operating environment. It is a much tougher job today than it used to be, and we really think this is one of the big changes that is being, if you will, forced upon the average contact center. They are being forced out of this mode of managing the contact center as kind of the factory floor and into this mode of actually trying to deal with the contact center and treat the contact center as more of a knowledge work environment. So if we go to the next page, we talk about the shift, this old world, new world shift that we see. In the old world, where issues were predictable, customers weren't very educated. They only had one option: pick up the phone and call. All the information was on the company side, and you could contain bad issues. Well, we could afford to run the contact center like a factory floor. You didn't have to pay that much attention to who you hired, the quality of hire, the competencies that were really required to perform. All you need was somebody who could come in, show up for work, they could adhere to the schedule, they could follow a script, and they could basically adhere to the checklist that was prescribed. We tended to upskill these folks through kind of rote training, more the peep dip approach to skill development. Again, most measurement was internally derived through internal QA. It was checklist oriented, and we really measured folks by the stopwatch and by checklist adherence. How close could you stick to the checklist? Now, when you think about that shift, as issues become more complex, as customers become more knowledgeable, as the stakes go up, and the opportunities for customers to spread negative word of mouth go up dramatically to negatively impact your brand, a lot of those mechanisms we used to use really start to fall apart and actually drive negative outcomes. And think about trying to manage to a new world customer contact with this old world factory floor kind of model, not paying attention to who you're hiring, just training people to deal with simple issues, but never really investing in coaching them on complex issues. Thinking about trying to script through, how do you script through sophisticated, complex, and varied issues? It's easy to script through simple issues, very much harder to do it when issues are varied and complex. So when we think about this new world, the stakes are much higher. It's really forcing companies to rethink who they hire. They're bringing sophisticated selection and assessment tools, a lot more science to think about the selection process, the hiring process, looking for the right competencies to succeed in the age of information-empowered, high-stakes, complex customer service. They're emphasizing coaching over training. Coaching because it's more tailored to the individual learner. It's more about varied and complex situations. It's not the sheep dip approach to learning. We're using external QA measurement, not just internal. We're thinking about quality and effectiveness, not just the stopwatch. And we're thinking about not just managing to the individual. You see that picture on the left-hand side, the individual with the big cubicle walls. We're actually thinking about how do we leverage the collective knowledge of all of our reps and their collective experience to really solve and tackle those complex customer issues. How do we bring that to bear, and how do we actually foster more, if you will, network interaction between our reps? Something that was crazy talk just 10 years ago, where we didn't want our reps talking to each other at all. But now it's about how do we actually foster that knowledge sharing between reps so that we can actually meet the customer on their own terms. I mean, they're talking to each other. Why do we keep our reps from talking to amongst themselves? So it really is this big shift from treating the contact center as a factory floor to now thinking the contact center as a true knowledge work environment. In the same way we think about R&D and finance and HR and IT and all these other functions, customer service is really kind of coming into its own in this regard, and it demands a rethink of hiring, of skill development, how we think about engagement. We can no longer tolerate high levels of turnover, because once you find this great person and you've invested in their skill development, they're delivering that low effort experience, by God, you got to keep that person. You got to keep them engaged and motivated. We're thinking about the role of the manager in terms of a coach, not just a performance manager. We're thinking about metrics. We're rethinking every single element of our human capital approach in the contact center. And we really see this as one of the big changes, and we saved it for last in the book. I'll spend some time in San Diego talking about. We're going to talk a little bit more about what we've learned specifically on the talent front here in just a few moments. But really, if we're going to say, what's the one big change we've seen, and we think this is just such a big change. Leading companies are already on this, but we think this is a wave crashing on the shores of every single contact center right now, is just forcing a fundamental rethink of how they approach their human capital in the contact center.
And we couldn't agree with you more that 2014 is truly this rethink of the importance of the agent, and it will be the year of the employee. It started in 2013. I really believe that, and social and mobile and all the emerging channels and platforms that are out there have really assisted with that. But certainly, contact centers are, they've realized it, but now it's the rest of the organization that is, backing up that contact center to say, it's not, we're no longer a factory. We're no longer just about the product or the service that we put out. We are very much about the experience, and we're about, that customer experience that happens in customer service is, a fundamental component of that. So, that leads, the question, why aren't we all doing this then? It sounds pretty simple, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it sounds very easy, but you're right. And I think a lot of this comes down to really the fear that a lot of people have. It is this fear of, if you will, letting go. We've tightened the screws so much, and it seems like intuitively, as things get messier, as things get more complex, it seems like the right answer would be to tighten the screws even more, doesn't it? But what we find is that by doing that, we actually deliver not just not a great customer experience, but in some respects an even worse customer experience. I mean, think about today's customer calling in with a complex issue, expecting a tailored service interaction, and getting that agent on the other end of the phone that is highly scripted and just, following the checklist point by point by point and treating the customer in a very generic fashion. Here's the company thinking, this is great because they're nailing the QA checklist, they're nailing the script, they're doing exactly what we said. And meanwhile, the customer's being, they're being driven nuts, right? Because they're not delivering that experience that they've come to expect. Now, your question about why aren't people doing it is a great one. And truthfully, I don't want to make light of this because it is a big change, it's a big transformation that we expect is going to take a long time for the average company. What I'd love to talk about now is just one of the places that we found is a great place to start. And it's a lot of what this comes down to. We spent a year studying the drivers of frontline rep performance. And this is something we've come back to over time. But this past year when we studied this, we found something really fascinating. We think about all the different things that we could teach our frontline reps. I mean, list out all the different skills and all the different competencies that you could think about a frontline rep having. And we try to look at what are those things that actually deliver the optimal customer experience. And just to be totally clear, the way we define that was about 50% customer effort. We used our customer effort score, so a 50% the extent to which they delivered a low effort experience, and the remainder on CSAT and other customer quality measures like first contact resolution. So we tried to take kind of a hybrid approach because we know that companies measure a variety of things, but we really tried to focus on was what are the skills and competencies that reps possess to deliver that high-quality, low-effort customer experience that customers today desire. And when we looked at this, we actually found something pretty fascinating. Typically when you talk to a contact center leader about, what do they look for, what are the requirements for success, you hear them talking about things like obviously basic skills. So I need them to have a modicum of product knowledge, to demonstrate some technical expertise. I need them to be a confident and clear communicator, be able to multitask, etc. But you also hear people saying, hey, with today's sophisticated customers calling about complex issues, I need to look for more IQ from my reps, or more cognitive ability. So I need them to be critical thinkers. I need them to be experimental, creative, intellectually curious. And you'll hear contact center leaders talk about emotional quotient, or emotional intelligence, it's sometimes called. So the ability to deliver empathy, flex to different personality types, to be extroverts, advocate for the customer, to persuade, etc. And when we look at all these things, we find out, they are important, and certainly reps who are better at those things deliver a better quality and a lower effort customer experience. So, for example, if you were to move from not very good to pretty good on basic skills, you get a 5.1% lift in your ability to deliver that kind of optimal customer experience. Or if you went from the not very good level to pretty good level on cognitive ability, or IQ, you get a 3.6% lift. Or if you go from not very good to pretty good on emotional intelligence, get a 5.4% lift. And that was all pretty interesting, and that's meaningful lift. I don't want to suggest that it's not. It's worthwhile to invest in those things. But there was something that popped in our research when we did this analysis, was a whole bucket of skills that fell into kind of this other category that together delivered more than any two of those other categories combined. An 11.2% lift from something we've come to call the control quotient. This is something that doesn't really naturally fit into basic skills. It doesn't fit into IQ, cognitive ability, or emotional intelligence, but it's a set of kind of other things, and it's sort of things like resiliency, ability to handle high-pressure situations without becoming burned out, taking responsibility for one's own actions and for outcomes for the customer, responding well to constructive feedback, both from the customer and from your manager, and the ability to concentrate and stay focused on task despite a high-stress environment. And so we came to call these things a control quotient. We actually defined it, as you see here on the bottom. It's ongoing rep resilience in a fast-paced and stressful environment with the ability to take complete ownership in each new customer interaction and continually learn without internalizing or shouldering, if you will, the customer's problems. So it was this fascinating bucket of other skills, and we didn't really have a name for it. We spent a lot of time debating, and what do we call this? And somebody suggested, hey, we talk about intelligence quotient, emotional quotient. This feels like the control quotient to us. It's a different category of skills, and as you see here, the lift is huge. Going from not very good to pretty good on control quotient pays off more than getting your reps better at basic skills, IQ, or EQ. And so it's a huge lift that can be delivered if we can up the control quotient for our reps. And it really makes sense as we think about this shift in the customer experience. We're talking about moving from rote, transactional factory floor kind of interactions to high-stakes interactions with information-empowered customers around complex issues. It kind of makes a lot of sense that we want reps with a high level of control quotient, doesn't it? But here's the rub around control quotient. If we go to the next page, when we start to peel this apart, one of the things we actually found when we looked at this is, because oftentimes people will ask, oh, great, I know I need control quotient. That totally makes sense. I get it, but how do I go and hire for it? So when we dig into what drives control quotient, here's the thing. It turns out that it's not actually a question of hiring people who can get better who have higher levels of control quotient. You can hire these folks, but interestingly, it turns out that most reps, most people out there in the world in a contact center environment, most candidates out there as well, have pretty high levels of control quotient already, or at least a modicum of control quotient. And it's quite an interesting thing. When you look at things like basic skills, cognitive ability, emotional intelligence, all that stuff on the left-hand side, it turns out these are things that vary by individual. These are actually things you'd want to hire for. You'd want to hire for people with good multitasking skills, good writing skills. These are the basic things. You'd want to hire for smart people, intellectual quotient. You'd want to hire for people who have empathy, who can connect with different personality types. The emotional intelligence. These are things you want to look for in the hiring process. But it turns out that most individuals actually already have a level of control quotient, but the place it varies is actually at the company level. So it turns out that some companies, if you will, unlock control quotient amongst the reps, and some of them really put the kibosh on it and really hinder it. So there are a series of organizational drivers of control quotient that we found to be really fascinating and really give some very tactical guidance, and I think comes back to your question about what should leaders do in this new world of the knowledge worker, in this new world of the information-empowered customer, how do I get my reps to be better at this? Well, here's a starting point. If you know as a leader that most of your frontline reps have high levels of control quotient, how do you unlock those things? In fact, I'd go even farther and say you could take reps who work in a low control quotient environment and drop them into a high control quotient environment, or an environment that allows for control quotient to be exercised, and they would instantly perform better. And by the same token, you could take high-performing reps in a high control quotient environment and drop them into a contact center where they really restrict control quotient from being exercised, and they would all perform much worse. So what's the way to unlock control quotient? We can look at that here on the next page.
I was just going to say, I think this is such an aha moment because, it would be very disconcerting to contact centers if they thought they still couldn't hire for these things on the left,
yep,
and that those didn't still have an impact, but that, from a company standpoint, their biggest influence is on that control quotient, and that they have the ability, to take all of those great things that they've hired for on the left and now raise and elevate, that agent to a different level.
That's exactly right. And, it's a powerful message for the leader, isn't it? Because let's say, just play a hypothetical out, because the truth is, every person on the phone today and every company out there, every contact center leader, of course, is investing in getting their people better at some of the basics. They're, of course, trying to teach them some more critical thinking skills or hire for those things. Of course, they're trying to teach them some more emotional quotient or emotional intelligence types of skills. But let's say for a moment you put all of those things on hold. Like you didn't invest another dollar in any of those things. What if I were to tell you that as a leader, you could make some changes at the top of the organization in terms of the climate that you create in the contact center that would unlock a capability that all of your reps have native to themselves, a sort of genetic code that they've all got right now that would actually allow them all to perform a lot better. I mean, it is much easier for me as a leader to pull a lever, pull one lever and then pull 1,000 levers by getting every single individual better, right? And so I think you're spot on here. When we break apart this control quotient, we actually find there are three things that drive it at the company level. One is trust, and it's a sense to which a rep would say, hey, my company trusts me to do what is right during customer interactions. Now, we know when we look at trust and trust in rep judgment, that there are clear signs of where this is suppressed in the company. So restrictive policies and scripting and checklists that really handcuff what reps can actually do in a customer interactions. Holding reps accountable to high levels or restrictive levels of handle time and QA checklists that really dictate what they can say, how much time they can spend with the customer, and what they can do in the interaction. Blindly following company rules without exception, and the perception that reps are perceived, or when reps are perceived as inflexible or robotic by customers. And these are all the warning signs that the company really doesn't trust what the reps are doing. But if we were to actually demonstrate higher levels of trust in the reps' judgment, to loosen up some of these policies, to send the reps the message that, hey, we trust you to do what's right for the customer. We're going to trust your judgment in different customer interactions. We can drive a 14.3% increase in control quotient, which we know then ties back to an increase or an improvement in the customer experience, lower effort, higher quality. Same thing around the next one, alignment. So this is where the reps are saying, hey, I know how my daily work, what I do day in and day out, my personal goals impact the company's overall objectives. I know how what I do on the front line as a contact center rep ties to what the company is trying to do at the higher level. It's the company's strategy and missions. Now, what are the signs that we're suppressing that as a company? What are the signs that we haven't really pulled that lever, if we will, or maybe we pushed it in the wrong direction? Well, strategic goals that lack clear applicability and tie-in to what reps do day in and day out. It's infrequent and impersonal communication from the corporate center or from leadership regarding company goals and objectives, things that reps see and they just kind of tune out as noise because it's not, that's company speak. It's not really about what I do day in and day out with the customer. It's reps believing that their daily work doesn't make a big difference to what the company's trying to accomplish at the higher level or in the lives of customers. Getting easily demotivated, especially in stressful situations. And these are all the signs, the warning signs, that we're suppressing the level of alignment that our reps have with what the company's trying to accomplish. But if we could get rid of those points of suppression, if you will, if we could generate clear alignment between the reps and what the company, between the rep daily actions and workflow and what the company is trying to accomplish, and ultimately what we're trying to deliver, the value we're trying to deliver to our customers, we can drive a 10.6% increase in control quotient. And then lastly, the last organizational driver of control quotient is a high level of peer support, a strong rep peer support network. This is where the rep's saying something along the lines of, hey, my company has put in place a structure that encourages me to seek out advice from my peers. They actually don't. They've done the opposite of actually, putting me in a silo with blinders on. They actually encourage me to interact with my colleagues on the floor to seek out their input, seek out their knowledge, and use it to inflect my own performance and improve my own capabilities. What are the signs that we're actually working against this? Well, it's a siloed work setting, both physical and, if you will, figurative, right? It's policies and processes that the company puts in place to prevent reps from sharing information and from interacting with one another, from sharing knowledge across their cubicle walls. Not providing the opportunities to share insight and knowledge with peers without management being there to kind of oversee it, right? Without them being there to monitor it, make sure no bad information is getting passed amongst reps. It's uncertainty amongst reps around which peers do I turn to for support and who do I lean on for advice around different kinds of issues. These are the signs that we're suppressing the level of support that reps perceive that they can get from their peers. But if we can, again, do the opposite, if we can provide those opportunities for reps to interact with one another, we can provide those safe spaces for reps to share insight, to share knowledge amongst themselves, develop that strong peer support network, we can drive more than 17% improvement in control quotient. So again, these are the levers of the extent to which you're sending the signal to your reps that we trust them to make the right decision, the extent to which they feel strong alignment between what they do day in and day out on the phone with customers and what the company is trying to accomplish and the value we're trying to deliver to the customer at the end of the day, and the extent to which they feel like they've got a good, strong, solid peer support network inside the contact center. These are the levers that I, as a contact center leader, can pull to actually unlock the CQ that is native within every single one of my frontline reps. So again, it is a good news story. It's not easy stuff, right? Because it flies in the face of a lot of the strictures and the policies that we've set up over time in the contact center, the factory floor operating environment or climate that we've created in the contact center. A lot of this stuff sounds a little bit heretical, I think. And so I don't want to make light of the fact that it is difficult to do, but it is controllable by leaders. It's not a question of getting every single rep to be better at this thing. It's a question of changing the way that you actually manage in the contact center. And the title we use in the chapter in the book is, really to get control in this world of high-stakes, information-empowered customers calling about complex issues. To get control in that kind of environment, you don't tighten the screws. You actually give control to the reps. And that's really the theme that we talk about in the control quotient and around building trust, alignment, and peer support across the rep population.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time today, and I'm sure that anyone who's been listening has walked away with more than a couple aha moments, but also probably a lot of questions that they'd love to ask you. And so I really encourage people to, reach out to Matt, but also to, read the book. I just finished it, and I got to tell you, it was absolutely fascinating. And, I'm sure the biggest question or the most frequently asked question you probably get is, how long does it take to make this shift happen?
Yeah.
If I commit to this, how long is it going to take that, for my contact center to feel it, my customers to feel it, my brand to feel it? And, so we don't have time to dig into that today, so maybe that's a question I'll ask you when I see you in San Diego. And, as I said, I know I can't wait to learn more at the Contact Center Expo and Conference coming up in May. And, if you haven't already, please reach out, take a look at our conference. We'd be pleased to have you there. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments about what you learned here today, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Matt or myself. And on behalf of Matt Dixon from CEB and all of us at ICMI, we thank you for listening today.